and
Hello.
live. It is Friday, February 7th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. and at the cabin in the woods, as you can see, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It is going to be a great fucking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV, a goddamn revolution in morning television, or if you happen to be in Brussels, or a revolution in afternoon television. Uh, um, I am just overwhelmed with joy at how America is being made great again. And it's a new era of international relations. It's a new era of domestic relations in which we don't even need USAID anymore. We don't need those civil servants. They call themselves servants, but they were really our overlords, our masters. We don't need Canadian hardwood lumber, even at the cabin in the woods where we just ordered a whole lot of it because, solidarity. But, if it never shows up, hell with them up north. It's all Alicia's fault. And we're just going to do a show and leave it at that. Raluca,
Um,
welcome to Dog Shirt TV. Um, I am going to let Alicia introduce you today, and then we are just going to have a freewheeling conversation in this new era of in which America is great again, and everyone else to hell with you. Alicia.
hello. So, Raluca, thank you for coming. I want to call these sessions, Ben, Carnegie Corner, where my friends and colleagues come on and entertain us with the things that we normally talk about over drinks when we get into cities together.
Okay, so
Raluca's.
let me just say something about that, which is, I endorse this completely because when Kate and I first started doing In Lieu of Fun, I think the show on YouTube was just like there's a correct the show description was just said there's a coronavirus crisis. We have a lot of cool friends, and it was openly and sort of nakedly, let's get a drink at 5 o'clock every day. And we did it for 2 full years every day. Um, uh, let's get a drink every day at 5 o'clock and shoot the shit with a friend. And so that is, I totally endorse Carnegie Corner. And I think we're going to officially name these Carnegie Corner because you guys are our next door neighbors. And unlike the US, the Brookings Institution is a good next door neighbor. And so we welcome you and all other Carnegie people.
For viewers who don't know, that's the food court for us.
We are Carnegie and Brookings are literally next door neighbors with AEI on the other side of Carnegie. It's very cute. It's like Think Tank Row and the Peterson Institute's across the street. It's very cute. And we all hang out together. And unlike Capitol Hill, we don't hate each other, even though the organizations may represent, although Carnegie and Brookings, I don't know that we actually represent anything different. But, we all get along and we're all buddies and we even tolerate the economists.
So, Raluca, welcome to this new feature. Raluca Csernatoni works in tech and on war and looking at how militaries are adopting new types of technology, among other things. And she comes to us from Brussels. And one of the major reasons why I thought it would be fun, beyond all the other things that we will probably come up with today, is the idea of infrastructure and services sovereignty. Let's call it that. And all the risks that may come along with allowing big international organizations to provide us with, let's say, internet service. What would you say the view from Europe is? Raluca, welcome. Say hi. It's very, very casual here. You can swear, apparently. Again.
Thank you so much for the invite, Benjamin and Alicia. It's a pleasure to join you. Actually, I'm joining from Vienna. Brussels is my, let's say, work home ground. So I also have some stories from the Schumann Square, let's say, and the European Brussels quarter. I can tell you an anecdote or two from the coffees around Schumann in Brussels. But yeah, today is Vienna, which is also very famous for coffee places and where intellectual exchanges are being made. But I much prefer the beer, actually. And the odd schnitzel for kind of shooting around ideas. So I don't know. Let's start with kind of your question, views from Europe. Of course, here the conversation of the day is how to navigate a new Trump order, let's say, and also what I would call a new techno-plutocracy emerging. And this is very much related to kind of your question about infrastructure, sovereignty. And these are questions that for a long time in Brussels have, for a number of reasons, occupied the minds of a lot of experts and policymakers. I call them the theological debates around digital and technological sovereignty in Europe. We can unpack this concept, which sounds very pretentious, but I think that the main point here is to build a little bit more autonomy, especially to navigate moments like these ones, both in terms of geopolitics, but also what I would call a new high-tech corporate hegemony that is moving definitely beyond the boardroom and the tech lab into international relations, power politics, and also warfare, as we have seen lessons from the Russian war in Ukraine, of how tech, digital is being used nowadays. So in Europe, kind of the question, how I'm not a fan, by the way, of football and sports. I'm more of a Formula One fan. But I always like to use this anecdote to kind of compare and contrast what's happening in Europe versus the States, but also to a certain degree China, where we can see kind of the leading tech and state powers in the digital sphere. I say that in Europe, we are very much diligently writing kind of the rule book of the game, how the football match should be played, while the other teams are very much busy recruiting the best players and, you know, constructing actually the stadium, which is the critical infrastructure. So that's why I always think that this is something of a kind of harsh reality that both in Brussels but also across European Union capitals has been made quite obvious in the recent years. And it encapsulates always this dilemma between innovation and regulation. But also when it comes to innovation, who controls what? Who is owning the technology? The emphasis in Europe has always been put on ethics and regulatory initiatives, which is very much needed. I think this prioritization of ethics is very much at the forefront of more of a responsible drive to use these technologies and to also curtail, in a way, what I would call the high-tech corporate hegemony. But at the same time, it has been in the past couple of years criticized as hampering innovation. Now, I mean, what do I mean by this corporate hegemony? I always look at it from different angles, from indeed the critical infrastructure, digital critical infrastructure, from space to under the sea, from how undersea cables are being laid out at the moment, from how satellites are being deployed, then compute power, big data analytics, all sorts of things, human talent, everything, all the ingredients and all of the pillars that are building this corporate hegemony. But then the puzzle, for me always, the research puzzle is the question at the core is how exactly in the 21st century this corporate high-tech hegemony being manifested. Is it the same, for instance, as the corporate state company, East India Company in the 19th century? Is it the same as, you know, these multinational companies in the modern era, like Ford, or, you know, the typical companies that we kind of study in the 20th century? What's the difference? And here the difference is, and this is kind of where the risks are, is how they control everything from that material critical infrastructure to the digital infrastructure, but more importantly, how they are producing now knowledge. And here the stakes are super high. Yeah, but by the way, interrupt me anytime.
No, I mean, like
I
that
can.
just that
Yeah,
like one, it's like, well, this is the information environment, right? In a modern information
Mhm,
environment. But then it's interesting because to me, the analogy between pre-existing companies in the past and today, it's not Ford. It is like the Hudson Bay Company, the East India
mm,
Company, like where you had control of ships movement of information as a result, stricter
mhm,
control around like colonies and where they're getting built and how those things are being constructed, for me feels a little bit more similar to what we have with like major tech companies that have the flow of information and also are kind of the backbone of modern economy, right? So
mhm.
like you take away the internet, you take away ICT, you take away all of this and everything else falls apart. Ben, you've got a face.
yeah. So I want to bring out a real conflict in what you just said and ask you to reflect on it. So on the one hand, I completely agree with your football analogy that the United States has been recruiting the best players, and recruiting is a very interesting word because, like international sports, they come from everywhere, and we get them to move here, and we get them to build companies and become tech monkeys for Elon Musk, including Elon Musk. And um, you guys have been busy building uh, the rule book, and the rule book often without a lot of attention to whether anybody would want to play under those rules. And um, and you're also correct that in this environment, um, the East India Tea Company is also the Renaissance, it's also Renaissance uh, Florence and, a sort of flourishing of knowledge. And so I guess my question, when you put that together, if you if you have all the universities are part of the football game, and
Mhm.
the United States, and let's face it, some other countries are recruiting all the best talent, and you guys are writing a rule book that nobody wants to play under, um, uh, doesn't that mean you lose?
Great question. And kind of this is on the mind and the kind of forefront of a lot of innovators, researchers, research and technology organizations in around Europe, policymakers, politicians. So in the past, again, couple of years, there have been a couple of initiatives moving beyond pure regulatory initiatives and governance initiatives in terms of investing more in critical areas such as artificial intelligence. Now there is a new initiative put forward by the European Commission. It's called AI Factory, so giving access to startups to train frontier AI models. There is a European Chips Act. So basically, there is now a shift in paradigm from kind of Europe, the market power, the regulatory power, the normative power, all of the powers that have no teeth, according to some, Machiavellian realpolitik researchers out there. And the movement is from acknowledging that being a rule maker isn't sufficient anymore to actually win the game. And for this, I think the fundamental dynamics and the shift is that there are investments in emerging and disruptive technologies. I mentioned AI, but also other areas like quantum computing, drone technologies, future generation networks. So the pieces of the puzzle are there, but still kind of the question is whether is it too late, and also how this kind of push and rush to innovate is being done. What is the unique selling proposition, and kind of squaring the circle between being an ethical, responsible innovator at the end of the day, and where some of these advancements are for the good of society. Because to turn back to the analogy of the East India Company and kind of the multinationals and also the big tech giants of today, one thing that they all share is a chase of profit at the end of the day when it comes to some of these innovations. So again, I'm also a fan of fantasy. Of this, I am quite a fan of. So in the Game of Thrones of today, where kind of armies are replaced by a very cheesy word, algorithms that count. And all of the great houses of tech are actually ruling the game. What role is there for Europe? And most of these houses, great tech houses, are transnational, are global, are digital. There are digital platforms, they are harnessers of big data, but at the end of the day they are also headquarters somewhere, and the headquarters are very much geopolitically defined, which is the United States and China. So where that place is Europe, it's a question mark. There have been quite some reflections on this, where Europe can contribute also on niche tech. Maybe the game is not to kind of catch up and really play the Game of Thrones, but rather to contribute with a unique approach to responsible innovation and technologies, but also at the same time regulate and be a first mover in all sorts of regulations in this more risky uses of tech, especially AI.
So I gotta
Um,
say, and I concede that to frame this in set theory, the set of regulators in Brussels who have ever asked my opinion on this is empty. And so I am aware that my opinion doesn't matter. And as a non-citizen of any EU country, I, other than a sentimental sense that it would be nice if Europe were competitive in this area, I actually don't have a dog in this fight. But I do think, you know, the lie that is being perpetrated on citizens of the European Union, which is that you can have all the access to technological products and much more privacy, and companies, the curse of bigness will not be tolerated in Europe. It's a lie. And they've convinced very large numbers of people to believe it, and the result is, Facebook is the same product in Europe as it is in the United States. Google is the same product as it is in the United States. um, the rapacious data brokers are just as capable of acting in Europe as they are in the United States. And what isn't happening in Europe is a whole lot of jobs. And I I do think there needs to be a conversation in Europe about um, whether you're actually gaining anything in exchange for the uh, policies that the European Union is adopting, and specifically whether you're gaining any of the good that is so piously claimed for it. And I think like a real reckoning with that would would be uh, would be sobering. That
mhm.
you're talking about many, many points of GDP iterated over a long period of time in lots of countries, and a major outmigration of European talent to the United States, um, all in exchange for what amounts to good press releases. And
Mm.
I I really think there's a serious conversation to be had here. It just doesn't involve me. So I'm not going to have.
That's starting. Like the Draghi report was like, it seems that the new commission, and Raluca, you can speak to this better than me, but it seems like the new commission is leaning this way. Although at the same time, I have to say that the situation in the US may bring back a lot of experts. It may lead
Exactly.
to a period of innovation. And I wonder too if we can't
Well,
look for, you know,
don't get
federated
me
services
wrong.
where countries support them.
I'm not holding the U.S. up as a model here at all. As you know, Alicia, I spend my day every day kind of like fighting the model that we're becoming. I don't think the answer to that is bureaucratized. I don't even know what to call um, the model, whatever the democratic alternative to what we're turning into, has to be competitive. And I don't, I don't pretend to know what the solution is, but it seems to me that the solution that Brussels keeps doubling down on for the last 25, 30 years is just got to be wrong.
So to push back a little bit on this, I mean, I appreciate also the criticism, which is the criticism that can kind of also push certain people out of their comfort zone to think about out of the box solutions. And coming back to the solutions is super hard because I also disagree of taking an innovation model that kind of is very context specific, like in the United States, and then supplanting that or planting it somewhere in Europe, because there are simply no structural conditions to kind of, encourage the same kind of success story that we've seen, I don't know, in Silicon Valley. So then you need to do what you can within the European innovation culture. That's one thing. And Alicia already mentioned the Draghi report is a kind of, a wake-up call type of report that looks in depth into all of these emerging and disruptive tech, all the buzzwords, the markets, the innovation capacity of Europe, presents a very quantitative and empirical and detailed evidence of the dire situation, and he calls it, or some other call it, the middle tech trap, an outsized focus on electric vehicles, on the automotive industry, while not being super innovative in this areas that will drive the digital revolution or whatever we want to call it. So there have been a couple of initiatives in this regard. Just 2 weeks ago, the Commission also published a competitiveness compass. Really nice name, by the way. Everything is a compass, a strategic compass, an initiative that will guide the future. And there are some important changes there in doctrine, I would say. One of them is an emphasis on deregulation and debureaucratization. And this will help, for instance, startups and SMEs, especially in the tech sector. There is also an interest in kind of maintaining, talent and incentivizing that talent, as well as prioritizing what the Commission calls critical dual-use technologies that are both important for economic security in Europe, but also for security and defense. And the laundry list is, again, similar to the buzzwords of the technologies that I mentioned. So I think that there are clear steps of a change in priorities, and also in trying to understand that things cannot function as they are. But besides this, I would like to kind of also present another concern on top of this. For me, actually, the real danger lies in surrendering authority and governance authority to corporate and capital interests. And this is something that I think Europe, and not only Europe, but other countries around the world, must navigate. And I think that indeed it's a complex landscape of how, again, to square the circle, ensuring that innovation happens, but it happens in a balanced way, and also with very robust safeguards to preserve a level of authority, because I think that the tech companies that are witnessing nowadays, and not only tech companies, but also tech CEOs, so personality-driven type of actions, are very much encroaching in areas that have been the only preserve of states. So this is also a question. I'm a IR person, international relations person. So I'm very much interested in actually understanding what's happening when it comes to political leadership, to power brokering, agenda setting, and also this rapid progress for the sake of technology and economic progress and tech innovation. This is a specific social technical imaginary that is pushed by an elite, a corporate elite, a tech elite, and this also needs to be challenged at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Well, I think that that was really apparent in Ukraine too, where you get people that control internet deciding who's going to get to use it when in the midst of a conflict.
Mhm. It's perfectly understandable to see how critical infrastructure again is controlled, but at the same time it's offered freely for a period of time, and then after that negotiated. And it's not only in this, the discussion needs to be also nuanced, because sometimes I find that whenever we talk about the battlefield in Ukraine, we tend to kind of emphasize the influence of big tech maneuvering and their technological prowess, and leaving aside also the agency of the Ukrainian entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurship, especially the civil society, the startups, even DIY type of companies that were producing drones and so on. So it's kind of a very complex landscape there. But of course, what we're seeing with Ukraine is a shift as well of how security and defense is being done, especially with the role of these corporate tech players that at the end of the day, again, they are in a way responsible to their boardrooms and not to a democratically elected parliament. As any democracy or liberal democracy, the military is under the democratic control of, parliaments, democratic and civilian control. So again, it shifts a little bit the power balance and the balance between public and private interests. State and corporate interest, as well as civil military dynamics. And it's fascinating to observe. At the end of the day, it shifts again the stakes and the ball in the stadium towards a new player coming into the picture, in the picture of doing warfare, which
Yeah.
is, life and death.
My compatriot, Ev.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering about like causation. We like to think that like the reason why Europe doesn't innovate is because, well, have you seen all of these regulations? That's the reason why. But I'm wondering what role the culture plays in Europe, the university, the way university teach. We know that the United States has like an incredible research culture in universities that might be
It's
playing a
weak.
huge role. Yeah, that might be among the reason why the US innovate more than Europe. And I don't
Mhm.
like this, like the conversation has been really like the reason why Europe doesn't do anything interesting in this area is the rules. But I don't think
But
we should frame it like this.
they
Mhm.
had. Nokia was kicking everybody's butt early on in the whole cell,
Mhm.
development.
And they do still with Ericsson in 5G. So let's let's not downplay also their role. But I completely agree. It's kind of a reductionist way of an oversimplification of always kind of pitting against each other regulation versus innovation. I think that again, in between, in the gray zone, the EU and Europe in general has done several things and can they put forward several strategies, key strategies, investments more in kind of homegrown innovation and companies. This has been in the last decade a priority area. Then strategic partnerships. This is something that I see starting to happen more and more, especially with digital partnership between the EU, Japan, South Korea, Singapore. There's a new trade and technology council with India, kind of modeled under the TTC with US. So let's see if that survives And I mean, everything was kind of bulked under this new word, what I call the theology, digital sovereignty building. So there have been voices in a way to balance out, the regulatory governance initiatives, and calling for more strategic investments in key areas where Europe is strategically dependent. And they were framed again in this notion that if you do not innovate and do not foster homegrown ecosystem of tech, you will be a tech consumer, or there were some also terminologies like Europe will become a tech colony. But it's very much in line. But I also very much agree in terms of the innovation culture, and this is from the school, from universities, from the labs, to then prototyping, and then to producing tech that is competitive globally. And also this question of scaling up startups, and the capital markets. These are all questions that the current actually commission is thinking about. So let's see what will happen in the next 5 years.
So, in the spirit of neighborly relations, we are joined by Jonathan Rauch, who, of course, is a Carnegie next door neighbor at Brookings. Jonathan, welcome back. How did you like my telling of your joke on last night's Dog Shirt Daily?
Well, I just thought I'd show up and volunteer to tell it myself.
We will have you do that right at the end of the show because I actually think that's an important thing, but let's hold it until the end of the conversation. Is that all right?
Did
All
it
right.
include the expletive?
Oh, it will.
Oh,
It has to. It
are
needs
we
to.
allowed now again?
We're going to hold everything related to the joke until the end, because there may be delicate ears who can't tolerate the key defining joke of our era that is the Jonathan Rauch joke. But we're going to get to that. Sorry, Ev, you were mid-line of questioning.
No, I think we have answer to it. Like, but just like creativity in universities and like how do you foster these kind of thing. I had a conversation with someone who used to teach both in the America and Europe, and the person was saying, like if you teach in Europe, you'll have students who just reiterate what you said in class, like the homework you'll get is just like exactly the same thing again and again and again, while in US it's more like you'll have plenty of bad ideas, but they'll be creative.
Mm.
Um, and
Yeah,
that
so
might
I just want to say on this, there is no sector other than USAID contractors that is more endangered in the United States right now than the great university. And not just the great university, but a thing that does not exist in Europe or actually in Canada.
Say
Um,
Europe like it's a megalith, monolith.
I mean, no. This is something that I think really
Let's call
doesn't
it
exist
Eurasia.
anywhere except the United States, is the small liberal arts college.
Oh yeah.
And, the sort of 4-year residential college. So I went to a small liberal arts college. It produced more PhDs per capita than any university in the country, not by a little bit, but by an enormous amount. These are, you know, and we are on a path to destroy an enormous number of these institutions, both because, we irrationally decide um, we don't care about public health data anymore. So we kill, an enormous amount of funding for all kinds of public health research, science stuff that all routes through universities, or a lot of it routes through universities, but also because we're going to go to war against anybody who says the word diversity. And so I think there's a, Ev's point and is a deep one. Like one path to competitiveness has nothing to do with the uh, uh, regulatory model. It has everything to do with the higher education model. And Europe, of course, is so much better at the primary and secondary education than we are, but so much worse at the higher education eclecticism, uh, diversity, and just the range of stuff. And I wonder if this is just a time for European countries to really think about what they're doing and what offerings they have in the higher education space.
Okay, I'm really going to take issue with this. I'm going to stand up for Europe. But in particular, like I had to go to London to do my PhD because I couldn't find a school here in North America that was innovative enough to do the subject I wanted.
I am not saying, Alicia, that there are not a million exceptions to this rule, but by and large, if you look at the pattern of educational migration, it runs distinctly in the opposite direction.
Do you think that you're, I mean, yeah, to some points I can agree to, but I'm also more in Alicia's camp here because of this sweeping. I'm also, by the way, a
Yeah, I'm a
professor and very
provocateur.
much in
I invite
academia,
guests
so
on and get them
I have
talking
to.
by saying outrageous things. It's me and Joe Rogan over here.
Yes, I am here from Eastern Europe, so having experienced a specific post-communist educational system that very much emphasized actually STEM, and all of the bright minds of Romanians post-communism actually emigrated to Canada and to the United States, especially IT developers and so on. There was a huge brain drain, so I take issue actually. And they didn't do it for academia, did it, of course, for money, and for having access to quality, let's say, research, and that's something to do more to the lab in the corporate sector rather than the lab in the university. So I wouldn't say that higher academia in Europe doesn't produce, cutting edge experts in STEM and so on, hence the brain drain. I would maybe say a nuance, and this would apply to the United States. If we want to understand what will be coming in terms of the digital transformation and all of these disruptions, what the model of education, higher education needs to do and change is to really embrace interdisciplinarity. And I think that academia and universities are not ready to go through this kind of self-reflection and start to think really deeply what's their role within society and how to navigate all of these issues, and as at the same time also to push back, because what I'm seeing in higher academia is always this fetishization of the market, what the market needs, we need to produce and so on. But let's be honest, I would say that academia or higher education still needs to be a place of knowledge first and foremost, and not kind of this factory of producing, the best developer out there and so on, or politician for that matter. Let's think about the Sciences Po's and all of these very high level, prestigious Oxbridges around there. So there needs to be a source of a very substantive thinking here. But if you defund and start to cut funding for research and for the sake of research, then you end up in what we would call a very neoliberal model of higher education that serves only certain interests versus others. So yeah, it's a very dire kind of painting of the current status quo, but I see that happening more and more, unfortunately.
There's been some chat in the audience chat, and I'm horrible at bringing up everybody's names, but I see Mateo and Jeff and others asking about the funding approach in Europe to support things like arts and STEM. Raluca,
Mhm.
maybe you can speak to how that
Mhm.
happens and
Mhm.
how its emphasis on collaboration leads to different things.
Yes. Yeah. So it's really interesting because one of the biggest funding instruments in Europe has been the European Union. And one of the flagship programs that the EU has is called Horizon Europe, and they are funding research and innovation across Europe. And they always emphasize this open research collaboration, as Alicia was mentioning, between different states in different areas, from STEM to social sciences and so on. So I think that's really, really interesting to see how much actually the EU and, kind of a counter argument to the EU bashing that you always hear, that EU only regulates or it's just a bureaucratic behemoth. But at the end of the day, some of these programs have been supporting cutting edge, labs, research programs in universities. When Brexit happened and the UK came out of the EU, I mean, this impacted a lot, actually, I would say hugely, the UK academic environment and having access to that collaborative network and also funding. Then you have national, of course, research organizations and kind of these national funds that fund more local research depending on topics. So these are kind of the drivers, or it's public sector funding that supports all of these interesting ideas, projects across Europe. And it's also based on meritocracy and competitiveness at the end of the day. The best ideas win. So the shifting of the model, I think, again, in terms of cutting critical research and innovation in areas that are not deemed as a priority, either because they are not lucrative or whatever, profit making in the limited terms of some voices that define that these are profit making. This is dangerous because, again, it limits the scope of what we can do and what we can think. Now there are conversations, of course, harsh conversations, that defense budgets needs to grow because, of course, the war in Ukraine. What does that mean in terms of, again, rebalancing where the funding goes and what is being prioritized? If you fund only cutting edge AI, frontier AI, without funding programs that think about the democratic implications of how this AI might shape electoral processes, where is the balancing act? And kind of to wrap up this more rant that I have, which I very much is very close to my heart, it's also for me the question of statecraft here. Who gets to do statecraft, from higher academia funding to deciding what types of research is for the public good, all sorts of things. Who decides on what? Who sets the agenda? And it's now this is being negotiated at the moment.
Who sets the agenda? We're talking about sovereignty, and how would you defend? And for one thing, I come from somewhere where the AU is not demonized at all. It's quite like presented as the North Star we all should be l- looking for. So like I'm
In
not in
stark
a
Yeah,
contrast
can we
both
join?
to Ottawa and Washington.
so
Can we
yeah,
join?
but these are the talks we're having, right, Alicia? Like Canada is talking about joining the AU, so we're not in a demonization space at all. But sorry, uh, we're talking about sovereignty. But like the GDPR is the Brussels effect. We're not about talking about the Europe not imposing its own agenda
Mhm.
here. So how do
Well,
you balance your point of like we need to uh, have sovereignty, but we also want to have our regulations apply everywhere in the world.
mhm. Well, the discussion on regulation, I actually put it under the sovereignty discussion. By being a regulatory power, by externalizing internal regulation, the EU is using a source of a power that builds its autonomy and strategic autonomy to navigate. It also, this type of approach acts as a norm diffuser. It also builds alliances because if you talk to other corners of the earth than the global north, sometimes there needs to be an alternative alternative to all of this reductionist dialogue between great power competition, which model to follow, where to bandwagon. Maybe a third way is the way to go, including in how you do research, technology, digital, everything else. And this model is much more, let's say, appreciated by these players around the world. I think when it comes to kind of questions about sovereignty, I always ask the following questions. Who gets to shape the global order nowadays? That's the first question. Then how do the ones that control the global order create the facts that frame these trajectories, especially when it comes to capturing markets, talent, statecraft, and so on. And also, very importantly, how do they influence state politics and policies? And here I also say, how do they influence EU politics and policies? So if you kind of follow, I would put it in these terms, you want to follow the money, of course, as well, but if you follow the power, then you kind of understand who gets to do what. For me, a kind of a defining moment was when I saw the Munich Security Conference, which is kind of this big gathering. It's kind of very state-centric, very driven by security, defense, all areas that are, again, the preserve of nation states and, classic IR kind of definition. But when you organize a roundtable and you bring around that roundtable all the big tech to give advice of how the next electoral processes and democracy will be impacted by their technologies, this is a significant shift in terms of recognizing where the center of power lies. We have had Denmark sending tech diplomats to Silicon Valley. Tech diplomacy is happening. The EU has opened an office in California. So these are kind of, for me, indications that how kind of this new order is being again negotiated, and more how again one of the functions of the state, that of legitimate monopoly over violence, again is being renegotiated by having non-traditional defense actors and military actors taking an increased role in warfare. And this is again happening, and we are moving away from the typical weapons manufacturers, the Lockheed Martins, the Airbuses, Thaleses, and so on. We are moving to a new military commercial complex emerging, which is also redefining, I would say, and here I would agree with, and don't quote me on that, by the way, next time, with Sam Altman, restructuring the social contract.
I wrote a book about this once. It was even called The Future of Violence.
Yeah.
And it has a long discussion of the social contract and how it is being rewritten in the context of the relationship between individuals, states, corporations, in the context of the miniaturization and democratization of technologies of violence.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Like I've played the bad cop and the anti-AU cop for a while, but now I'll play the good cop and the pro-AU side. But I was in a conversation in Asia there were Americans and company people and people from India and Pakistan and stuff, and the American company were saying like, well, if you have regulation of speech, you'll like the Asian countries will, it will empower authoritarian regime in Asia to censor more speech. And the Asian were like, no, no, actually, we like those rules. We like the AU. It exactly does what you were saying. It gives us a third path between China and US. They are both very extremist version of
Mhm.
speech. We like to have rules that are, yes, it prevents some kind of stuff, but not
Mhm.
all of it, and it gives us a
Mhm.
path. People from Hong Kong who have
Mhm.
actually lost their democracies. So
Mhm.
I've been a bad cop, but I see the point of Europe as well.
I'm happy that I'm here, the good cop, actually, because when I have panel speeches in Brussels, I'm always the bad cop. I'm always criticizing, so it's very refreshing to, in a way, turn the table around. But kind of to this point, and also something that Alicia and I were discussing over a beer in Brussels last year, it was fascinating to see kind of how, for instance, the economic interests of a handful of players is starting to become very, very enmeshed with national security interest. And I think here's a very interesting puzzle as well. And this is also the puzzle for a lot of other places around the world that are witnessing this. Because what I'm expecting happening in the next few years is very much this nationalizing tendency. You know, all these kind of protectionist tendencies, looking inward, and trying to kind of, again, navigate different models from different perspectives. But I think more and more we will see how these technological conversations will become center stage in national security policies. And by national security policies, I'm not thinking, again, just military defense, security, hard defense issues, but I would say economic security issues. And then what you were mentioning there is more about how do you define your, culture, what you stand for in terms of values, norms, ideas, what you believe. It's the balance between human rights, privacy, safety, responsibility. All of these issues kind of will be negotiated, but will have more and more of national security flavor, or at least will be kind of parked under this logic, because it will be very hard to navigate what will be coming yet again. So then looking all, inwards might be a solution. And the risk here is that this type of inward looking tendency will be instrumentalized by different players, political players in those societies as well. And those political players to be at the same time instrumentalized by some of these foreign interests. At the moment, there is a huge debate in Europe about the role of Elon Musk, for instance, when it comes to commenting on UK and German politics. And this also raises quite a lot of eyebrows. And this is also an example of how sometimes the blurring lines between the economic interest of a CEO and then the economic interests of certain companies are more and more interlinked with national security priorities, or it will be harder to differentiate. And this is me a bit more bashing diplomatically.
I cannot
Yes.
imagine why Europeans would be sensitive to a South African American plutocrat tweeting and speaking in defense of an extremist neo-Nazi party in a country that he's never lived in. That seems like you guys are super oversensitive, and I just, can't you take free expression? I mean, what's the problem, guys?
Nice. I like the devil's advocate that is being played here. Also, kind of, again, throwing a ball in the game, which is the free speech discussion and what we understand by it.
Yeah, I mean, free speech. He has spent $44 billion to buy Twitter, and it's and that's the definition of free speech, is buying a platform to shut other people up and elevate your own voice, and particularly to elevate your own voice in your extremism and project it into countries where it's not wanted. I can't imagine what the issue with that would be.
I don't at the moment have necessarily an issue with this specific case study. I will make it more
I do.
general. I know. I will make it more general. Again, my academic hat on at the moment. For me, the question here is what is again the role of these digital infrastructures, huge platforms in shaping, and this is Alicia's again game. It's the information environment. What would they do? And beyond the information environment, what they do with knowledge production. And here is at the core of what would a true, let's say, public debate potentially happen when it comes to certain elections. And when you use algorithms to elevate your voice, and when you have a certain reach and you kind of master exactly this globalized critical infrastructure towards your own personal interest, then it becomes an issue yet again of national security. And besides the Elon Musk kind of incident, I can bring the case of Romania, which is very close to my heart because I am Romanian and I was dormant when it comes to being invested in what's happening in my country of origin. When the democratic elections were happening last year, and we were seeing how TikTok was instrumentalized by Russian-sponsored troll factories to kind of push forward a specific candidate that is extreme right, pro-Putin, anti-NATO, and anti-EU, with allegedly no money spent on his campaign, because that's something that he declared, then this became, for me at least, the political became personal. And the personal, of course, becomes political, but this is a clear example of what we can expect. And again, who controls what? Every politician in Romania that was running for presidency was also promoting on TikTok. But why exactly the campaign of this individual was elevated versus the others? So this is kind of, for me, the algorithmic power of such platforms and how they can manipulate, in a way, electoral outcomes and also the integrity of a democracy. But yeah, what's the solution? And then I bring in Europe and the EU. The EU has the Digital Services Act that wants to promote responsible behavior on these platforms. And then we end up saying, no, this is hampering innovation, but actually it's a good instrument to really introduce more hygiene and also more responsibility in the behavior of these technological giants, of what they can do. But I don't know how effective it will be. And this is me being more pessimistic. At the end of the day, it's how effective it will be to kind of curb this behavior in the long term.
We are going to leave it there. Raluca, thank you so much for joining us today in the inaugural edition of Carnegie Corner. We hope you will come back regularly and often. And Jonathan Rauch here is a good model of that because he was the guest yesterday, the day before, or whatever. And he just showed up today because he has a joke he wants to tell. And that's the model here. Once you have that link, you can use it anytime. We are live 5 days a week between the hour of whatever time it was when you logged in Vienna and the time that it is
2
now.
p.m.
Yeah. So join us anytime. You don't need to announce it. You can just show up and we will integrate you into the conversation as we are about to do with Jonathan Rauch. I was sitting at lunch 2 days ago with a friend who is a recently former national security official in the U.S. federal government. I will not name said person. But he's also a friend of Jonathan Rauch's. And we were doing what everybody does in Washington, which is bemoaning the fate of the city and our culture and our people. And he said to me, you know, Ben, the thing that I can't get out of my head is this joke that Jonathan Rauch told me a few years ago. And he reminded me of this joke, which Jonathan had also told me, and which offends, I think, about 98% of people that you tell it to. But I think it is the defining joke of our time, that actually everything represented going on currently in Washington is encapsulated in this joke. I wrote it up on Dog Shirt Daily last night, but I happen, as Woody Allen might say of Marshall McLuhan, I happen to have Jonathan Rauch right here. So Jonathan, tell us the joke. And trigger warning, if you're the sort of person who's going to be offended by this joke, don't hang around and complain to me about it later or complain to Jonathan. Just log out now. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
I should say that although I love this joke, I very rarely tell it because it's very dark. Most people don't think it's funny, at least until recently. Apparently, in our current national condition, this joke is now funny.
I have always thought it was funny, just for the record.
I should also say that it is not hypocritical for me to tell this joke. I'm not against the use of F-bombs everywhere and anywhere. I'm against the use of them casually, mindlessly, and to no effect at all, merely to water them down. There are occasions when that word and only that word will serve, and this is one of them. A guy walks into his doctor.
Throat clearing accomplished. Go for it.
A guy walks into his doctor's office to get his test results back, and the doctor says, well, I have some good news and I have some bad news. Which would you like first? And the man says, well, I guess the bad news first. And the doctor says, you're going to need to sit down for this. I'm afraid it's a little bit tough. You have an inoperable brain tumor. It's going to kill you over the next 6 to 12 months. I'm afraid you're going to lose your cognitive ability. You won't recognize your loved ones or your family or friends, and you'll be in severe pain which won't respond to medication. The man breaks down into tears. He begins to cry and to sob until suddenly he looks up and he says, wait a minute, doctor, you said there's good news. What's the good news? The doctor says, come here. Takes him by the arm, walks him over to the window, points out the window and says, you see that office window across the street? Yeah. You see that woman there who's in front of that computer, that really buxom brunette with the really hot body? The guy says, yeah. The doctor says, I'm fucking her.
There it is. It's the defining joke of our time. And if you need further explanation, just understand that Elon Musk is the doctor. All right.
Cruelty is the point.
Yes. Well, and also good news for you, bad news for you, good news for me. No, I think the joke is very deep. And I will just add to it a joke that I have told on Dog Shirt TV before that is also comparably dark, although in a different way. So when that man succumbs to his disease and dies, he goes up to heaven and he meets God. And he's a little intimidated because, what do you say to God? And so he says, do you want to hear a joke? And God says, sure, I love jokes. And so now the guy's got to tell a joke to God, and it's got to be good. And he kind of says the first joke that comes to his mind, and he tells God a Holocaust joke. And God kind of looks at him and says reprovingly, I don't think that's funny at all. And the man says, yeah, I guess you had to be there. All right, we're going to leave it there. Two dark jokes, the central jokes of our time. We will be back on Monday. I don't know who the guest is going to be. I don't know who the hosts are going to be. Maybe Jonathan will show up with another joke. Maybe Raluca will show up again and we can swap more stories and whatever. Maybe Alicia will be leading an invading army of Canadians to burn down the White House again. You never know what it's going to be, but we'll be here. Keep the faith, keep smiling, and tell the key jokes to everybody you know.
Thank you.